Well, if you haven't realized, before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the story that you really want to hear, but here's a story that most people haven't realized that this happened. And those of you never really used this before, you may have noticed if you use an antenna. But now, since we are fully in a digital signal, what happened to the old signal? Well, basically, on July 13th, the FCC has now discontinued those companies, broadcast companies that were using an analog signal, or terrestrial, as most people would call it these days. Those signals have been shut down, with the fine exception of several areas, which is mostly in the Alaskan territories, because the digital signal antennas are not all up. They're still working on that because, unfortunately, it gets too cold in the winter time. So basically, they have to stop work for a portion of the year till the weather is warmer. So they'll be able to work on the towers on there, so they'll be able to bring a stronger signal to the area. I mean, we've discussed this many times about MeTV, where people said, well, I've lost my MeTV channel. I've lost, that basically the channel is not there anymore on there. And I've always said, there's a YouTuber named Antenna Man, and he gives some great information. I mean, if you really want to see the depth of what's going on with the analog TV signal and stuff like that, he's one guy that has been going around the country, scanning those signals, trying to figure out what is still there, what is not there anymore. And this includes also radio itself. If you've been listening to terrestrial radio, and we had a American Asylum episode about over a year ago, which we had the guest radio producer Thomas Cicerillo, who explained on how basically the terrestrial radio is dying out, because basically most of the signals are going to online now and digital. You don't need the analog signal anymore. Those stations are now available on iHeart and Spotify and many other different services. So why need the analog signal? And then, of course, in the video signal, in the regular TV analog, now we have the changes over from ATSC 3.0, which also Antenna Man can give you it's a very complex thing to talk about, but he gives the best interpretation of what this is, why do we need it, and stuff like that. But because of those changes, you have networks consolidating their channels on different frequencies in a upper band, and consolidating them all together. So like you may have 4 or 5 channels working off of the same band. And that's why a lot of networks is on that. And you may ask yourself, well, what's happening to the older bands? Well, the older bands are being sold off as cellular frequencies to companies like AT&T and Verizon and stuff like that. At one point, and probably today, because technically the FCC says everything was supposed to be shut down by the 13th. If you go scanning through with your antenna, you might barely be able to pick up something left of it. There are some signals out there that are still roaming around, but the thing about it is, these stations should have been off the air. They can get in trouble with the FCC. They could be fined for that because the FCC gave them extra time to begin the process of shutting down. That's why, like I said, a lot of times, your MeTV signal has been moved, and on there. MeTV FM, on the other hand, is allowing to work on that frequency. That's one of the other exceptions on there. So if you're a listener to the MeTV radio, it's still available on there. There are not so many changes of the MeTV radio stations because they were able to get, before this thing was passed, they were able to get a sort of pardon to the situation, so they were able to continue broadcasting on those frequencies. So that's pretty much the only one that's left. But like I said, the Alaskans, their signal is still going on, and there might be some in between somewhere to further northwise as well, like toward anywhere where there's near mountains or something like that. But as far as that, analog is dead. I mean, I grew up with a lot of analog in my day. Like I said, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, born in the mid to late 60s, and grew up highly in the 70s. And that was before really cable was setting in, and we lived on those signals. You only had 3 networks. You only had ABC, NBC, CBS. There was a channel 5 at the time, but but that wasn't a network yet, so that was independent programming. You had channel 9, you had channel 11. That was PIX and WWOR, which are now networks in themselves. Then you had channel 13, and then you had some stuff on the UHF channels, which were of PBS nature, like channel 13. This is mostly in the New York area. We had channel 68, we had channel 21, and a couple others in between there. And then, of course, the Spanish networks with channel 41 and 47, which those were the Spanish networks. 47 in itself was the network that introduced me to anime via Nippon Television on the weekends. I mean, before anyone thought to sell programming time to the infomercials, before the time of the infomercials, some of the independent UHF stations sold time to other entities to help bring new type of programming, and also programming for those who at the time didn't speak English at all. Nippon happened to be one of them. Nippon Television, because there was no cable, like I said, was just starting, and people didn't think to have stations that were made for certain viewers of different ethnic origins. But there were networks out there in the UHF bands that were growing that catered to the French, to the Italians, to the Japanese, to the Chinese, to the Koreans. There were all variations out there depending on where you lived in the country. And it was good. It was a good thing. You had all this stuff, and you were able to get this small amount of programming, but it was not a lot of programming. Then cable came in. Cable came in, and the frequencies started to shuffle out. That they started to go over to broadcast directly to the cable and away from the UHF and analog signals. Even though they were still broadcasting in analog, those signals kept going for years on there. Then around in the 2000 era, the FCC had mandated that the analog signal needed to be changed to the digital signal as we were changing into a more digital format, and pushed a policy that basically in the next decade or two that the networks needed to change their frequencies. And we saw some of those frequency changes that were happening already in the 90s as well. Because some stations, depending on where you like, Florida was changing their frequency signals because they saw that coming. Some networks already saw it coming and started to change their frequencies and signals and stuff like that. And you got to see it on air. Basically they sit there and flip the switch and boom, the signal changed. The old signal was pushed aside. UHF and the analog signal was very important. It was very important at the time. And to see it go away, it's a shame. It's a real darn shame on there. As the years progressed, a lot of the stations tried to work with the FCC, telling them not to shut down. Some of them wanted to stay on because they basically would lose certain viewers. And some viewers didn't believe in cable. They didn't want cable. Analog. I lived in Florida for about a decade. And I did some electronic servicing for customers, TV installations and stuff like that. People who wanted stereo. This was at the time, when you were hooking up speakers to your TV and stuff like that to get a great signal. A lot of these people didn't use cable. They used analog signals. They used their rabbit ears. But we already knew at that time, and we were telling customers, you got to get cable, because those analog signals will be going away. They'll be, being pushed off. I mean, you already had frequency changes moving into an upper band. So certain TVs that were manufactured from a certain time period were losing some of their signals. So they weren't receiving the signals, and you couldn't adjust them really on there without some sort of box to bring in those signals in. You couldn't. There was so much you can adjust as far as your antenna move in whatever direction that you won't pick up the signal, because it's not that they basically has moved the antenna. They moved the frequency to a higher location, which some televisions didn't get. So those who had an older TV, or as we used to say, the below 171 channel, I think it was. If the TV said if it was like 99 channel frequency in the books, you couldn't receive it because it didn't receive the upper band. It was just on the lower, because the lower band was analog. It was an analog television. And as we moved on, you saw that now you still have your antenna ears, but we're using a digital signal. And there's still issues with that. Like I said, they're still pushing the frequency further up the line as the FCC down are selling off everything on there. And this includes this includes radio too. Your favorite radio stations that are on the 88 band and stuff like that, those are all disappearing to a higher band frequency, or they've moved over to iHeart and Spotify like everybody else. So I have to say, R.I.P. to the analog signal. How we loved thee at one point, and it's hard to say goodbye, as they say.